Hi, everyone. This is Juliana from CyberTalk at Raices. We're back with another episode with one of our esteemed guests, TJ. We have already posted the recording of the interview we did with TJ. This is another opportunity for you all to ask questions and learn about TJ's journey. TJ, welcome to the podcast officially or live. Uh,
Appreciate it.
Happy to have you with us.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Appreciate you having me join
So
today.
we met back at RSA, and I want to go full circle on RSA this year and congratulate you on your speaking opportunity. That's a big deal.
Yeah, thank you.
Congratulations. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what it felt to be on stage at RSA and kind of what you talked about and the audience? How did they receive your talk? Tell us a
Yeah,
little bit about that.
absolutely. Yeah, so it was pretty exciting, right? I mean, I've only been speaking in different places the last few years, and so it was real exciting to be able to do that at the RSA conference. And specifically, what I talked about was just around influencing culture. So I think a lot of times organizations they think of cybersecurity as just a bunch is a lot of technology, which it is. There's a lot of technology involved, but I think more importantly, sometimes it's the people component. And so I spoke a little bit to practical ways to help influence culture, whether that be something as simple as a fish button, being able to use that to influence people or influence culture inside of an organization, or even third party risk. Companies have to vet and assess different other organizations that they partner with to make sure their security is strong enough and aligns with their own organization. And so there are ways using those controls and risk assessments and what have you to really be able to influence culture. Because at the end of the day, if you have an entire company who truly believes security is, for lack of a better wording, a big deal, recognizing that it's important, that really helps the overall posture of the organization. And so that room largely was, I think there were a lot of board members, executives. There were a number of people who were in the day-to-day technical weeds. So it was a pretty broad audience. What I was after is trying to focus on folks who may be a little bit more on the technical side, but learning how to translate risk or learning how to translate that technical back to the business. But yeah, it was pretty exciting. Opened a lot of doors out there and a few other speaking opportunities even from that. So it was great.
What's next? Do you have one coming up, or should we save that
I
for?
mean, I got invited to speak to Italy, so I'm trying to figure that one out.
Oh,
Still working on that. So that was kind
good.
of neat, and I love the travel in general. So we'll see if I can pull that one off.
That would be amazing. We have to coordinate and make sure you're maximizing your trip so there's no other conferences happening in the region.
Yes.
So yeah, we can talk about that later. But congratulations. I think that's a point where a lot of speakers, it's one of their goals, right? Like it would be awesome to take this globally or like internationally. Though I will say RSA is one of the largest conferences
Mhm.
out there. So you have the nice hack of the audience from abroad coming to watch your talk. So congratulations. For those of you who haven't had a chance to review the episode with TJ, um, we talked a little bit about his journey of how you went from help desk at the very beginning. You tried a little bit of everything, network engineering, security architecture, and you helped build the SOC, become a director, and then eventually stepped into risk, which brings you to your role today in
Mhm.
as an information security officer, unless that has changed.
Yep. Nope. It's still the
So
same.
can you talk a little bit about how all that journey and all those roles helped shape you as an operator today, right? Because there is a mindset shift going from the super technical into more of a leadership and influencer role at your organization.
Yeah, so it's having the technical background, I think, has helped immensely. It was also the hardest transition of my career. I've had a couple of hard transitions, and going from very technical to the risk and business, it was definitely difficult. But where I found it to be valuable are, I'm able to translate to the business owners, right? So you have security professionals that say we want a SIM or we want to enhance our SIM tools, but they can't quite translate the why behind it. And so I've been able to take some of that, go back to the business and say, well, hey, here's how this aligns with, say, the corporate strategy or a business objective that's taking place right then and there, whether that be a new technology being implemented or maybe some efforts surrounding customer facing work that the business is doing that may not be technical, but then I've also been able to take the business side and go back to the technology folks. So, I'm just one person, but what I've been able to do now is, take things that I see happening from the bigger picture, the business perspective, and I can go back to the technical teams and actually say, hey, when you're talking about let's say we're getting into the business of password cracking, hash cracking with Active Directory, for example. I can go back to the team and say, here's how what you're doing in terms of password cracking relates to the broader organizational mission. Or I can take to them and say, here's why executives may not care as much about this area because it doesn't fit to the bigger picture. And so it's helped immensely being able to translate back and forth. Still a work in progress. I'm certainly not an expert at every little detail there, but yeah, it's helped quite a bit to be able to do that translation.
And I say that I open up the conversation because we have a lot of new talents stepping into new roles or SOC analyst roles, and I've met a few that are interested in a more leadership or influence role based role, and that is great. It's amazing to have roles, but we have to understand that a lot of these people that are in your position, you've had to kind of switch between back and forth between different roles, right? We
Mhm.
talked a lot in the episode. If you're not able to understand technically the problems or understand the work that IT has to put in beyond the security controls and the security team, then you're not going to be able to influence. So you can be great with human relationships, you can be great at kind of hearing the latest trends, but if you don't try it a little bit yourself, and get hands-on, it will be hard to convince people because they will realize, right? Do you know what you're talking about? And there are people that talk about their leadership in ways of like, oh, what do they know? They're so far from what we do on a day to day that a lot of times it feels like a political decision, right? We're going with this vendor because of XYZ. So I appreciate you sharing that background that, a lot of people forget about how they started. And
Mhm.
we like to encourage folks at Raices to explore roles in help desk and network engineering so that they get the IT fundamentals that will only help them get stronger and build a stable foundation before they jump into the next security path that they choose. Now, at your role, being able to influence different parties, do you want to talk a little bit about the stakeholders that you talk to and you have to influence, and then when how are you able to, I feel like that is an art, right? How are you
Mhm.
able to get buy-in on a hard initiative? What are some key pillars that you fall back to help you get buy-in?
Yeah, sometimes and I'll go to the simple word relationships, and more specifically, I may talk with someone, a stakeholder in the organization over the course of months. For example, if I see someone, so I work in a building where we have a lot of people, north of 200 individuals in a single building, and so fortunately for me, it helps because I can float
That
around
is
the
cool.
building. I can drop, if I get cookies randomly and go drop them off for a team, there's no intent behind it. I don't need anything, just go drop them off or go say hi. And over time, I've built a little bit of that credibility so that when, something does come up down the road, it makes it a little easier. They're more receptive to the story I have to share uh, when it comes to needing something. For example, we have folks in our building where I may go to them, approach them, and realize they may have some sensitive information that shouldn't be sitting in an area that they have it sitting in, or at least not overnight. And so I may call that out, and the knee-jerk response is, wait a minute, am I in trouble for this? And the reality is, no, I'm just trying to call it out. But if I do that over time, and I find ways, security isn't a joke per se, but if I can find ways to add humor in that, over time, I can start to make small comments such as, look, the clean desk police are coming around and it's a little bit of fun, but then over the course of months those same people who I keep seeing do the thing they shouldn't, they're now the advocates telling everybody else around them to do or not do certain things. And so then over time, by doing that, it's building a little bit of credibility from my end, but also strengthening that influence. And on the surface that sounds very small and maybe not as big, but that influence is really disciplined over time. You're disciplined in, giving out things, not necessarily material things, but comments. Hey, look at who stopped a phishing message. That's a big one. So if a phishing message gets past all of our controls and somebody's able to catch the fish that hit their inbox, and that fish could have led to, if we can find a way to show how they saved thousands of dollars, then we bubble that up to the top and we recognize that employee and say so and so hit this fish button. And as simple as many people may think that is, look at what it saved financially and look at how that brought value to the customer. For example, right now I'm doing a lot with our sales team where I'm trying to partner with them, show them how to manage their own digital risk, just even their own social media.
Yeah.
And now that they're getting stronger at that, they're able to then speak more intelligently to customers. Now, their sales teams, not technical at all, but they're now helping customers learn how to manage their own digital risk. And that's a huge value prop. And then those sales teams, in turn, always remember, hey, TJ helped me with X, Y, and Z. Let's see if we can partner up with a bit more. And it builds this machine, if you will, kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah, you're building up your champions in the
Mhm.
organization. You're empowering them, not leading with fear, right? Who win, like no one really gets motivated by fear. But first, we have to be our own examples. So the advice we give, we have to follow it ourselves, but also building these champions. And I remember the first time I talked to you, you always kept back to go you went back to recognizing others, building up your team so that they have opportunity to try different things, to step up into leadership and take on more initiative. So, and back to your talk at RSA, I mean, that's how culture starts, right? That's how you
Mhm.
build culture, building people up. I appreciate you taking the time to share that because it's one of those it's very invisible, the work that happens, but it's little by little every day that we're able to influence culture. I want to pivot a little bit into the role of information security officers. We can mention the industry, financial, right? And that depends by the size of our organization, the role, what you do. But at the core, there's fundamental components to this role. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because the goal at this podcast is to show the audience before they step into a role, what does it actually mean beyond the paper description and the job description? So we talked a bit about how you spend your weeks, your month. There's cycles you mentioned that
Mhm.
sometimes it's more heavy on the vendor reviews, you're looking more at reports. There's cycles where you have to go back, let's say you're reviewing a tool, and then you have to kind of go and explore what that tool actually feels like. So we're trying to paint a picture of if I were to do this or pivot into this from a different facet of
Mhm.
cyber, what will my days look like? Will I be interacting with humans, influencing them? Is
Yep.
it a mix a little bit of everything?
Yeah, so to your point, and even what I shared before, vendor management. So I'm responsible. This role is responsible for information security or cybersecurity for all of our vendors. So if we partner up with a vendor, at the end of the day, our customers, they don't care if it's a vendor or if it's us. They just care that their information is safe. And so there will be those periods of time where I'm spending a lot of hours during a given week focused on reviewing those vendors. And that specifically looks like reading through reports. Often the industry is familiar with the term SOC reports. So sometimes it's that territory. Sometimes I'm spending a lot of time reviewing those and pen test results of those organizations, and trying to document the what the risk is to our organization by us partnering with them and then providing recommendations internally to say whether or not that vendor is too much risk for us.
Mhm.
There are other periods of time where I'll spend a lot, like you said, on the tools. So even recently, I've spent a little bit more time in our technology stack. And so I'm trying to evaluate, do certain tools provide the functions that we need as an organization when it comes to security? And I may jump into the weeds for a little bit of time, but then I also rely on the technical teams. So I can share with them, here's what I need to make sure it does. I personally don't care too much on the day to day. At this point in my career, it doesn't matter to me as much. I just need to know that they're able to function operationally and manage the risks that I've kind of conveyed to that group. Some other areas, I do a lot of reporting. Personally report to, I think, 5 different groups now, whether it's our board of directors, whether it's an IT steering committee. I chair a cybersecurity committee, so there's a lot of governance. So in one committee, I may be very technical and I may be managing meeting minutes and meeting agendas on a regular basis. But then in a different committee, I might be sharing, here's the state of cybersecurity, and it's very high level. And so I'm constantly pivoting between those. If I'm speaking to an enterprise risk group, I may even get less technical and just say, here are the material risks to the bank or to our organization, or here are risks that are emerging. Here are the up and coming risks with AI, let's say. And I would present those more to that committee. And so a lot of my role really is translating between different committees. The other unique challenge is keeping track of that. So if you step way out and look at an organization holistically, you have a committee and a governance structure. The details are down in these subcommittees at the bottom, and they should roll up just like in a normal, employee structure. CEO, for instance, has a very
Mhm.
high level and is very visionary, doesn't need to know
Right.
all the intricate details. But because I sit in all these different committee functions, I'm constantly sharing, the same story, say about data loss. I'm sharing a story, one version of it in a cyber committee, but then I'm sharing a completely different version of that story with enterprise risk. And then I just have to make sure that there's continuity. So if there's ever, let's say in the financial world, we have examinations, we have audits that take place. I have to make sure that meeting minutes in all of these places reflect all the way through. So if one committee heard a certain, story about data loss, there should be some reflection of that upstream through another committee. And so that takes a little bit of time and orchestration, not just storytelling, but knowing what message is getting presented so that, a year later, that story is on paper and there's a documented trail. Um, there's periods of time I may go a couple of months and it's a very heavy audit season. So I may be interacting with auditors coming in from the outside, translating to our IT team or our own internal audit functions and making sure the risk is getting communicated both ways. So our team will provide the details. It's specifically evidence. So that's usually the word auditors like is let's provide evidence or due diligence that you're doing Active Directory reviews. Let's provide evidence that firewalls are being reviewed regularly. And then my job is to make sure that we are consistently providing the same evidence. And then when I pass that over to an auditor, I can then communicate to the auditor, here's what this data means and how it translates to the risk in which you're looking at. So there's a lot of that translation and communication that happens. Then there's the periods of time. Actually, last week I had a presentation, a 2-hour presentation with a couple of colleagues. So there are periods where we have new hires coming in, or we're doing more presentation heavy weeks. And so I'll be building slide decks or coming up with new stories, which usually entails of here's how much money was lost in this situation. Let me communicate that in terms of cyber risk. The other, what I think is kind of a fun part in the financial space is fraud. So information security and cybersecurity is just one piece of it. But when you talk about fraud, there are tangible dollars lost that have nothing to do with ransomware. And so a lot of times I'm partnering with, say, a fraud team to make sure that I understand the risks that lead up to fraudulent activity. And then how do I educate effectively to folks, customers included, to not fall for the scams. But then when it comes to the fraud side, I have to be able to understand the back end of that. And so there's a lot of joint effort between fraud and then this function and even physical security. Think about, even across the globe, everybody has ATMs, right? There's still cash. We have cards, but we have cash. So now you get into the world of surveillance, and there's a lot of correlation between surveillance data and fraud data, and then cybersecurity from a malware perspective, let's say. So there are periods of time where I'm, interfacing with these different groups, and that's some of the collaboration that crosses past even cyber and information security.
Yeah, that's fascinating to think about. I I mean, I didn't see it before from this perspective, but first thing I want to ask is so many stakeholders and so many like committees, subcommittees. How do
Mhm.
you stay organized? I mean, I feel like once you learn their language, it's easy, right? Because
Mhm.
you kind of like observe what their metrics are, what their hereabouts are, what align
Mhm.
yourself to their initiative. But how do you stay organized with so many?
Yeah, some of it is historically in my career. So talking about skill sets, being detail oriented was actually really helpful in that. And specifically with all these committees, I have a bit of my own workflow. I mean, each committee has its own, let's say, SharePoint site where data is stored. But then for me, I use a combination of just OneNote and some Excel sheets. I say Excel on steroids. I have a massive roadmap. And so I use that to figure out which
Well,
committee hears what type of data. So if I need to present, penetration test results, I know specifically which committees I need to send that to and the order in which they go. So I have that mapped out in just a big Excel sheet. And then throughout the year, part of my workflow, my day-to-day workflow is periodically looking at that sheet so I can stay on track. January, we're in what, May now. And so even this coming week, I'll be looking at June to determine, all right, what major action items need to take place in the month of June to hit these goals that are, set out for the entire year. And that gets into, yeah, keeping track of which data goes where. And then a lot of times, if I present, let's say, to a smaller or a subcommittee, I'll actually put on the first page of any slide deck, any kind of dashboard, I'll put the date that it's presented and the committee in which it was presented. That way, if these documents get shuffled and it's a year or two later, I can look at any of those outputs, those reports, and say, all right, that was delivered on this date to this committee. And that shows, for me, it shows a trail of what was cascaded where. But yeah, a lot of it's just been trying to get really organized between just, OneNote and Excel. I use Power BI a bit as well to track some of that.
awesome. I, of course, have to ask you about AI,
Mhm.
how it's changing the way we work. I personally use it a lot to stay organized for all the nonprofit work that I do and have projects for each of them. And right now with Cyber Polyglots, my new gig, I am definitely using it for activities and CTFs that will showcase in future conferences when we set up as a village. But for me, it's been a huge accelerator to turn those admin tasks that I don't enjoy doing and kind of like accelerate my work. So, for you personally, how have you ingrained that into your daily workflow
Mhm.
and use it as an enabler? And then we can talk a little bit about the business as well and the how you see it from a business perspective and the risk that comes with it.
Yeah, so specifically, kind of pivoting briefly to something you asked earlier. So coming from the technical space to non-technical, there are definitely things I don't care to do. And so one of those is
Yeah.
I personally, I may sit in the seat where I'm reviewing reports all day, when it comes to vendor management, but it is a very long and tedious task. And for me personally, it can feel a little dry. So I've had to reshape how I view my career. It's not in the past, I would joke with people and I would say, I go to work and I get paid to play with toys all day. Literally, I play with network equipment, I install firewalls, a lot of fun. And now I look at reports. So I've had to learn to find enjoyment, fulfillment in slightly different ways than I would have early in my career. And one of those is in vendor management. So when it comes to AI, I've kind of built a workflow for my own role where I can ingest, large amounts of, when I say data, we're talking very large PDF files, and I have
Mhm.
pre-written prompts that will help cut through all those files. So what I've been able to do is take 8 hours, what normally would take me 8 hours, and I've cut it down to maybe 2 hours. And instead of putting all the time on reading and reviewing these reports, I have the prompts built well enough that they'll cut through all that noise. And then my time is spent more on the quality assurance side. So I'm looking over the outputs. I know where there are usually risks in a specific type of report. And so I look at those key areas. and use that really just to cut down on the time it takes for me to read. When I can take 8 hours down to two, I mean, that's for me, that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
So that's also a thing that I don't care to do as much, just not the most exciting thing for me in information security. So if I can use AI to augment that and speed some of that work up, it's a big win. And then I'm also able to do, what should take two of me, I can do it with just one of me. So it's not like I don't need to delegate out some of those functions. I can do it while leveraging AI. The other piece that I found it very useful for in the security operations space is if we have a bunch of data. By data, it's your log files from a SIM or a combination of SIM and EDR. You can plug that data into some of these Gen AI tools and say, "Hey, here's a ton of information. Can you give me an output or give me a summary?" And I found that useful. While from an analyst view, sure, you can spend a bunch of time figuring out the details. There may be one or two perspectives that you didn't have initially where AI can spit it out. And from there, that might help with an investigation. So I've used that actually specifically on looking at user activity, 5,
Okay.
10,000 log records. What AI can cut through and say, hey, here's an individual user, here's their patterns over the course of 3 or 4 months, here's the shift in pattern. And things like that. There are some tools that do that natively, but when we can just pull raw log data and run it through there, it
Mhm.
definitely helps.
Then with everything that's great comes responsibility
Yeah.
and risk,
Yep.
especially at an institution that is a financial one. Where do you even start? How do you even implement the guardrails? Do you have a
Mhm.
committee? Are you part of it, or how are you influencing this type of um, mindset shift, right? Like, hey, it's great, but we also need to balance with productivity, right? How do we think about risk?
Yeah. So if you think back to the whole idea of influence, so for us, what we found effective is we had a small group, and I was part of that group from the risk side that evaluated how can we as an organization leverage AI. We kind of pieced that together over the course of a few months, put together a final report, presented it to the right committees. What we ended up doing on the influence side is we said, look, we can block all the AI tools all day long, but the reality is everybody has a phone. It is 100%, not a 90%, but 100% guarantee people in the company are going to use it anyway if we say no. So why not encourage people to use this thing that the whole world sees? And so
Mhm,
we set up, Copilot and
mhm,
put the guardrails in. Your DNS restrictions say to keep people from going to personal Copilot. On top of that, we start encouraging folks to use Copilot, and then we can block all the other AI as people started to leverage the one that we've approved. And so the reality is people could still use, the different tools that are out there, but now there's enough
mhm.
people in the organization using it just to experiment. We've essentially built a sandbox for experimentation. And now, again, on the influence front, now we have all these champions inside the company who are all jazzed up about what they heard on the news and how they're learning about AI, and they're able to use it in our little experimentation box. So the guardrails are put in conjunction with encouraging people to use the thing that the whole world is seeing. So that was kind of the approach we took. And then, from a risk standpoint, even beyond cyber, it's important, in our case, think about legal risks. So if
Mhm.
an organization, any company says, look, we're safe, anybody on the outside, if something bad happens and it's shown publicly, it's easy for someone to argue, well, you misrepresented yourself. You said you were safe, but you're not. And so things like that from a PR lens,
Yeah, huge reputational
yeah,
risk.
all reputational, and reputational risk can lead to financial hits, et cetera. And so one of the questions we had to ask is if AI outputs a bunch of data and then that data is used for decision making,
Mm,
who's managing that bias? Because in the financial world, there are certain things that you can and can't do because it's bias, and bias is illegal in a lot of different cases. Um, so there's a lot of legal risk there, and that's where you're, beyond cybersecurity, where you have to have the business, whether it's legal, whether it's marketing, compliance, et cetera. You have to have all these different folks involved beyond just the risk of using a Gen AI tool.
yeah, I mean that is a lot to think about, and especially someone in your role. I don't want to say you're like the it's a it's many people's job that fall under your scope, but it is a lot, right?
Mhm.
So if someone is thinking about this sounds very interesting as a career path for me, something I want to pivot to. Do you want to give them some sort of warning as to
Mhm.
this is what you're signing up for, or this is what you should prepare for? I know we gave a good idea, but maybe something a little bit more authentic to this,
Mhm.
like step into this once XYZ, you're ready for XYZ type of advice.
Yeah, I mean it's certainly rewarding. It's cool. I mean, candidly, there's a lot of
It
excitement
is cool, yeah.
on the side of risk. I think for me personally, when I got into IT and cybersecurity, again, it was all about going to work and getting paid to play with different toys, Cisco,
Mm.
Meraki, all the different things. And now I know Cisco, right? It's one of the best. And so I would get really excited about that. But then now some of the challenges I deal with is not everybody likes security. I mean, the reality is there are a lot of times I have to say no to something, whatever that thing is. And there are real risk reasons I have to do that. But then downstream, people may not fully understand the why, or they may choose not to understand it. And so there can be a sense of, oh, wow, here comes the no person. And so not everybody's my friend in this world. That's something I've had to learn really quick, and especially as I've moved up within an organizational structure, is I do have to make hard decisions sometimes, or I have to do things that I may not think are hard, but it is not felt or perceived as, hey, this is awesome by the recipients. If someone, let's say somebody, I'll just use the very direct language, violates a policy. That's the organizational language. There are certain policies that if someone violates, actually can lead to material harm to the company. And so if I see those things, I have an obligation to the organization to step in and assert, in my case, certain authority if I need to, or engage with HR, engage with some of the executive team. Fortunately, those aren't common, but yeah, there's definitely a challenging side to that. And so I've had to learn new ways to collaborate. So when you're in security, especially when you're responsible for it and you're accountable for it, collaboration looks different. It's not like I'm sitting in a room, with other analysts and engineers saying, "Hey, how do we build all these things?" Sometimes those people may not want to talk to me because I may be the one that they're assuming is going to say no. And so that's
Yeah.
where it gets into relationships and influence. And I think it's one of the most imperative skills I found is just emotional and cultural intelligence holistically. Is I early on in my career, I was not good at those. I thought it's my way
Okay.
or the highway. This is the best way to configure a firewall. And then as I've moved through my career, I've realized there's a much bigger picture, and I've had to be willing to, realize I don't know everything, and there's a lot more, which is good. And I've also had to learn, yeah, that emotional intelligence side, and I've had to get a lot better at the human aspect of it, to be able to navigate some of the tough things that I've run across.
But do you think that is um it just takes practice to get to that
Mhm.
level, right? And experience. Because I do think some people are more naturally gifted at that. And we all have different stories and backgrounds. Some people have had to deal with several hardship earlier in life, so that I don't say they have a leg up, but they were forced to deal with different personas earlier in life.
Mhm.
I want to specifically shout out immigrants, a very resilient
Yep.
community, but we've had to translate risk to different parties at a, I'd say, early age and learn the consequences or think 10 steps ahead of if I say it like this or if I do this, these are the consequences that come with that. Uh, but yeah, back to the question. Is it just experience? And if someone is finding themselves in that technical role and wanting to challenge themselves to get better at the emotional and cultural intelligence, what are some concrete steps or advice that you would challenge them to
Yeah.
that they can implement in their daily life, in their daily role outside in the community work?
Yeah. So specifically, I don't remember what year it was when I made some pivots, and some of my pivots between technical and non-technical
Mhm.
roles, I realized very quickly, that empathy specifically was not my strong suit. And I've actually had people tell me in recent years that I'm crazy, that it is a strong suit, but the reality is I had to be very disciplined. And
Mm,
I had taken, I don't remember which one it was, emotional intelligence, some kind of EQ test I took. And there were certain areas that were really high, but then empathy specifically was actually really low. And it didn't surprise me, but I realized at the time, if I want to move more into leadership functions within an organization, like formal management functions, I was going to need to get better at EQ. And so by taking that assessment, it was one of those where I take it and then realize, oh, these are the weak points, and then do my homework to figure out how do I improve on that, whether that's reading books on, I think one of the books I read was How to Be a Great Boss, something along those lines. There were different books that I read on leadership, and as I read all these books, I think I read about 50 books over the course of 2 years, and that was almost, I don't think any of them were technical at that point, and a lot of it was high performance leadership, managers, stuff like that. And I found they all said the same thing, just different versions. And so once I realized there are a lot of these common things you can focus on, I leaned into some of that to strengthen my own EQ. So I do think it's possible for very technical people, or those who may not have strength currently, to be disciplined, um, and learning that, and then reassessing after a year or two. So EQ test, figure out what to do to improve those areas, and then come back to that same test a year or two later and see, hey, did I improve? Did I not? I think another thing that I've leaned into, I wasn't the greatest of listeners when it came to non-technical people years ago. And so I've also learned that it's helpful to lean into other people who know nothing about technology because they have a whole different perspective. And so I've found, unstructured mentors. It's not a, hey, will you be my
yeah.
mentor? It's just been, I'll give someone a perspective, and those who have stronger emotional intelligence and people skills, I'll hear how they communicate. And what I can do well is I can see a problem or see a thing, and I can sort of figure out what they're doing that works. And so I try and model what have they shared, or how do they function? How do they operate in the midst of conflict, let's say? And I try and adapt some of those principles. And that's been really helpful for me. Um, so yes, to your original question
Yeah.
around just, yeah, how do you tangibly do that? What are those steps? I really do think taking those EQ assessments and realizing, hey, there's more that I personally can do to enhance my skill sets in that space, and then just figuring out, just like any other technical problem, figure out how to navigate some of that people side.
Yeah, we deal with technology all day, but it's um it always comes back to the people.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes as very technical folks, we can make the wrong assumption that empathy or EQ, or that doesn't mean just because that is a skill you're trying to get better at, or maybe you're good at, doesn't mean you can't execute. So
Mhm.
it's an accelerator to helping you execute, which is why we try to spend so much time talking about it, because the hard skills you can learn. But I like what you said about modeling others. I know every time I talk to leaders like you, I have things that I take away. And I'm not saying I can be a copy of you or someone else that is inspiring to me, but there is definitely their candor, their mannerism, the level of detail, the thought and care that they put into, let's say, for example, I was in a presentation training last week. It was with the director of sales, and he told us, when every time, don't think about only yourself as a presenter, but think about the people. Let's say you're hosting people to present. I always put two water bottles by their tables. There has to be a table always next to them, right? It's very little things, but if you think about it, these little details add up, and they improve your relationship with these folks and like these stakeholders. And of course, people want to work with people that they like. So I'm not saying you have to be likable, but let's try to get
Yep.
better, right? Challenge to y'all watching. So TJ, let's go back a little bit to the mentorship aspect and maybe sponsorship. And I want to tie that with the community work you've been doing with B-Sides and B-Sides Fort Wayne, which you're welcome to do a shout out because I know it's coming up, right? So talk
Yep.
to us
Yeah.
a little bit about those. both worlds, how you're going about community building with B-Sides in Indiana, and then the how that can help someone find a mentor and a sponsor eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, B-Sides in Fort Wayne. Yeah, I think it's June 6th. Very close for that event. Super excited. But yeah, for me, it's been, I've tried to find ways. There's a Discord channel we have, and there's quite a few engaged in there. So
Yeah.
thinking of the student side, right? So we've tried to bring in students, whether even high school to some degree, and then college and beyond. But what's been really cool to watch, and what I've been fascinated with, is watching, if you have people saying, "Hey, here's a resume. I need help or guidance," and then watching, I've done it. There's been others where they'll see that there's an ask about a resume, and naturally, most people want to help other people. It's a pretty common thing. Not everybody, but a lot of people do. And so, there's someone asking for resume help, and then I've been able to reach out and say, "Hey, sure, I'm happy to help." Or in one case, there was an individual in a university who said, "I'm trying to convince our student population to watch their cell phones so they don't get scammed, to watch text messages so they don't deal with phishing scams." And so myself and another individual hopped on a call with this university student and were able to give some ideas on just education in general on how to translate. So in his world, here's what he was thinking in terms of education. Well, we were able to give a slightly different perspective, some similar perspective, but a different perspective, and how he can get that buy-in from his own peers. And so that's being, even though it's been a Discord channel, there's a lot of open forum so people can just read the messages to see, oh, that is some interesting advice. There have been opportunities where, I mean, I've gone out to lunch with a handful of folks, lunches and coffee and what have you, just to go chat about cyber or career development. I had somebody the other day, so I'm involved in a few different, cyber and IT groups and AI here in their city. And I even had someone walk up to me and say, "Hey, TJ, I, talked to a few people and they said I need to meet you." I have no idea who this guy is. But apparently, whatever I'm doing seems to be working in a way, because now people are coming to me saying, "Hey, let's go grab lunch and let's just have a conversation."
Mhm.
And so I found that by being consistent, right, I've worked on all this emotional intelligence, really tried to be more relational over the last 7 or 8 years is the big chunk of it. I found that it, does resonate with other people, and in turn, it's given me opportunities to help, mentor other folks, not in a structured setting. I've done that too, but it's very unstructured. It's just, hey, let's grab coffee, let's grab lunch, and talk for an hour. And that 1 hour, there could be two or three things that I've shared that help change, the trajectory for someone, and whatever way makes sense. I've actually had several full circle events where, because of certain connections, I've been able to connect. And I was actually given an opportunity, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago for leading a security practice in our organization. And, I said, no, not interested, but I knew an individual from some of those circles. And so I made 2 phone calls, and the next thing I know, he was hired onto that company. And so that's that power of community, right? It's, I know how the work ethic is of this one individual. And so for me, it's like, wow, that would be a perfect fit. Let me see if I can connect the dots. And that worked. Or another case, in fact, RSAC 3 years ago, I think it was 3 years ago now, I
Oh,
was at an event one evening with someone talking about, some of the intelligence world, and saving people from some really dark places, gathering intelligence for law enforcement to do some things. And here in our local city, no more than not even a year ago, I'm talking with a barista who said she was going to school for criminal law and trying to do all these things. And I was able to make that connection 4 years prior. And that's a little more global context, but yeah, being able to be relational and have those conversations, even here in the local, city and local community, has been invaluable, not just for me, but for others. Um, so
yeah.
yeah, that's my big thing is, yeah, getting involved in those groups sometimes can make a career, can
Yeah.
really help a person.
I love it. That's the one. I mean, one of the principles I operate on as a person is why not spend the time to do good? It doesn't
Mhm.
cost you anything. Literally, being the connective tissue between people, ideas, like is totally my thing. And just saying a good word, or when you vetted the person already
Mhm.
and you have an idea of what trajectory they're on, or what they need. Maybe sometimes they need a little nudge. Maybe they're super technical. I this happens to me a lot. I meet all these amazing folks that are super, super technical, but unfortunately they don't always have the um, the power or the education yet to translate that to business value. And
Hmm.
I I just see that with customers. I see it when those who are able to translate the value that their teams are putting in the organization, they're more likely to get budget because they're articulating that. And then you might be doing great work, but if you don't talk about it in the boardroom or influence your direct manager so they can bring it up, why why should they bother, right? So that is a big, it all comes down to translating
Hmm.
risk, translating languages.
Yep.
And I know you're a fan of translation. I mean, learning different languages. Actually,
Yep.
that's how we connected. Uh, that's why DJ is on today. He's a huge ally for the Latin community. And when we met, that was a first topic of conversation.
Yeah, I
And
think you were what was it, walking down a sidewalk, and I
I
thought, I wonder if she
was trying
speaks
to like
Spanish.
coach you from the beginning to get involved with Raices. And one day, maybe, yeah, we can co-present in Spanish together.
That could be a blast. It'd be a blast
Yeah,
for sure.
it would. I'm all about full circle moments too.
Hmm.
And it's funny how things work out when you work for the community and you help the community, they think about you as well. But don't do it in a transactional way because we people can't tell, right? People can't
Hmm.
tell. Most folks that I meet want to be in this field because it's very mission oriented. Uh, you want to be that person that is able to be there and save others, from especially like fraud, something that is something very impactful that changes lives. So, um, yeah, it's small and on a local basis, but it pays dividends once you put in all the work in the community. What about you, TJ? You mentioned looking out for others and finding them mentors, finding them opportunities at a level like this. And how do you go about finding people, sponsors? I'm assuming sponsors are a little bit more crucial to find for, the next thing, or whether it's moving up at your company, getting buy-in for budgets, for decisions. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so for me personally, I've never had like a sponsor or like a structured mentorship. I've not had that. It's been a lot of unstructured. And so what I've found is just I've been pretty transparent. Sometimes I'm a little too transparent with folks. I just say here are the challenges I'm facing. It could be personal, it could be business wise, and how it all integrates together. And I've found that while being transparent, it can bite here and there, but I've also found it's given me opportunities to meet people who are like, wow, you're a really interesting person. How can I help you? And the more I've just talked with people, so, I mean, even you talking on the sidewalk of San Francisco at the conference, I do that with a lot of people. I just start
Yeah.
randomly talking to strangers and I joke about that.
Th-
But I've also found that by doing that, it actually has opened doors all over the place. And
Yeah.
then I have found people, even here locally, who are, connected with actually one individual just 3 or 4 weeks ago was connected with who is part of some Latin American business communities in our city. And that door opened because of a few different conversations and getting connected with some folks and somebody else who connected me with that individual. And so I just found that being more open about some of what I'm after, there's a lot of people who actually want to help other people. There's a lot of very generous people. Generous doesn't mean money, generous can mean time. And so if you talk to a lot of different people and you cross
Yeah.
paths with just the right person at the right time, they may be willing to say, "Here, let me help you out." Even at RSAC, kind of a small world, there was an individual there who I connected with. Actually, who was it? There's an individual there who I connected with and found out that one of her sponsors to send her there with, financially even is someone who mentored me 3 or 4 years ago. Had no idea. And then I saw some LinkedIn posts and saw the connection made, and it kind of surprised me. It caught me off guard. And so I reached out to the one who did the sponsoring and just said, "Hey, this was awesome to see because you helped me several years ago."
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, there's a lot of generous people out there with their time, and it's sometimes just asking or talking to people and just speaking up. sometimes you can find the right advocates.
Yeah.
I've done that both in my own organization, locally in the community, and then even now a little more globally.
And it's not about title, right? Like
Mhm.
you never know the extent of a person's network. You never know how creative they might be about connecting you to opportunity. Um, be nice to people regardless of their title.
Yes.
That's all I'm gonna say, right?
Yep.
They don't have to have the C letter in their title or executive for you to want to have a relationship with them, professional relationship, um, symbiotic relationship.
Mhm.
It is give and take. Um, so I want to encourage the audience. We do have 3 minutes left. If you have any questions for TJ, but I do want to use the time to talk a little bit about B-sides, anything exciting. What should the audience expect this B-sides in Fort Wayne? And how old is it now? Is it
Yeah,
your
this will be June 6th will be the fifth year. So this
fifth
is
year?
the
Oh my
fifth
God,
year
it's a big
running, and
deal.
yeah,
Five
it's
years.
pretty exciting. I know we've got a capture the flag event that there's a few folks who drive that every year, and that's worked out really well. Anyone who attends, there's certainly a lot of different talks. I know there's some non-technical subjects, there's some technical subjects that'll be floating through there. We certainly like to actually push on some of the non-technical because we've also found even at B-sides, even though there's a lot of tech and cyber focus, a lot of times people want to hear the big subjects like burnout. And so
Oh my God, yes.
there's a lot
I
of,
know a great person for
yeah,
that.
yes. But yeah, super excited about the event here in a couple weeks. And yeah, we should be, this will be our, yeah, like I said, the fifth year, and it's been growing every year. So we're excited to look forward to seeing people come. We've had people, I mean, even from the Indianapolis market, we've had people here from Chicago. All over, even from Ohio and a few different places. So it's been really good. And that again, that community, while this is the annual event, it's been cool to watch the Discord growth and not just the engagement in there, but all that mentorship publicly in Discord, and then also monthly lunches with one group. There's a group that meets 10 or 15 of them just for these lunches every month in different places in town. And so there's a lot of that that kind of spirals out of there.
Now, one thing I love about B-sides is how local it can get,
Mhm.
and no matter there's, and usually you'll find that folks that organize the B-sides in each city, they're the leaders you'll see at bigger conferences, or whether it's RSAC or whether it's DEF CON. You don't have to feel. I know there's a pressure of when I meet either students or early career folks that they get the question as, are you going to DEF CON or are you going to RSA? And they're like, oh, like, I didn't know about it or I don't have the financial means. It's not normal for a student or early career person to go to all of this, even one of them. There's scholarships available. But these are more I don't say like specific extreme situations, right? Where they offer a scholarship and it's limited. So don't feel that pressure. And my encouragement is look at your local B-sides and start getting involved as a volunteer. Don't go and do it every year just because you want to be a volunteer. You can try it out, kind of like work with organizers, get to know them, create opportunity that way, show how reliable you are as an individual. But also, like, you want to experience the actual conference. So that's why I say don't go volunteer every year. Try the CTFs, try the activities, talk to the sponsors, learn about their product. And see how they influence you in that conversation. And prepare before you go to a vendor table and go with some questions, give them some hard questions. And you will kind of like see how you're challenging yourself already thinking about the business value and translating that value that those sponsors bring to your organization's environment. But yeah, little words of encouragement and advice for our audience here. It was a pleasure having you on, TJ, as always. And
Yeah,
I can't
appreciate
believe
it.
Italy might get you before any Latin countries. We have to fix that.
Yes.
And then where can they keep in touch with you? You're on LinkedIn, pretty active.
Yep, I'm pretty
Uh,
heavily on LinkedIn. I haven't been in the last few weeks, but LinkedIn's really the main channel.
yeah, awesome.
I think I don't know if that's in the post or I can send
Yeah,
you.
we'll definitely share it.
Perfect.
It's very, very easy to find you. And then, besides Fort Wayne, the Discord is open to
Yep,
audience regardless, excuse me,
correct.
if they're in Indiana or not, right?
Yep.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining. Find TJ on LinkedIn for any follow-up questions or mentorship, or you never know what can come out of it. And good luck, TJ. We'll keep in touch for sure. Bye now.
Yeah. Thank you.